a plan to make your husband better in bed. You can't expect a Sunday morning to be exciting or thought-provoking. It's more suited to the afternoon when soccer or the Grand Prix is on TV. And that's exactly how I like it. Established, predictable, following a pattern, so you know where you are and what to expect. Like that day last July. Sunday morning, full Monty's breakfast, a newspaper and a nice cup of tea. Everything in its place and nothing to worry about. "Can I ask you a question?" she asked. Linda. Why do women always ask if they can ask you a question? Why don't they just ask a question? Or why don't they ask if they can ask a question? This could go on ad infinitum, and they are illogical and, in my experience, basically the same. In any case, I chose to ignore it. It would only lead to a conversation, possibly an argument, and all I wanted to do was read the paper and find out what the Arsenal team would be for the day. "Can I ask you a question?" She repeated in exactly the same tone, not annoyed at my silence and adding nothing to her first request. This was a bad one, didn't you know that? She was serious, and I knew her well enough that she would go on and on, until I answered. "Yes, of course," I replied as nonchalantly and disinterestedly as I could, or maybe uninterested. Either way, I hoped she would take the hint and leave me alone. She knew that Sunday morning was my special time. I was working 6 days a week, making a good salary, and taking care of my family. And I needed time to take a break from the week. "That's right," Linda said. "It's very important, you know." I hadn't realized it was. She was probably wondering what she should wear tonight when we went to the pub. Not that she ever paid attention to what I was suggesting. In any case, I looked up at her and waited for her question. "Sometimes you have to be considerate of your wife. She has some rights, you know. I wanted to ask you if it's okay with you." If it's okay with you. It'll be fine. "Okay, no problem. Just go ahead," I interjected, already losing interest. I knew she wouldn't ask to spend money or anything like that. After all, she managed all of our finances. "You don't even know what I'm going to ask for," she snapped back. Oh God, I thought, now I've done it. I won't get any peace until I listen to her. "Yes, honey? What do you want?" I demanded, focusing my full attention on her. All my efforts to look genuinely interested were reflected on her face. She stared at me for a while, and I remembered how beautiful she was. Not a beauty or anything, but pretty and a good figure. At least not bad for a woman in her 40s. So I nudged her to start since I was wasting time reading and my tea was getting cold. "I was just wondering if you'd mind if I made love to someone else," she whispered. Just like that. No warning, just like that. I stared at her, trying to figure out if she was joking or freaking out or something. She couldn't be serious, not my Linda. "What did you say?" I asked, thinking that maybe I had misunderstood her, or that she might be telling me what she really needed to tell me. "I think you heard me the first time," she replied, clinging to the words as if afraid to ask the question again. What is there to do? What do you say? My experience in situations like this was very limited, virtually zero. The only buddy of mine who, to my knowledge, had any experience of a wife doing something like this was Mark, and I could hardly ask her to wait until I went to him for advice. Besides, he'd already screwed things up, and I didn't want to be blown off like that guy. "Are you serious?" I asked finally, unable to think of anything else to say, but she only nodded. Good God, she was being serious. "Anyone in particular?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but feeling like a total asshole for asking such a stupid question. But she just nodded again. which didn't help in the slightest. "Who is it?" I demanded, trying to get angry to be bossy, but truth be told, the spirit had been knocked out of me and I was floundering badly. "No one you know," was her curt reply. I didn't understand anything and just didn't know what to say next. Strangely enough, I started to get angry, started to lose my temper. What right did she have to do this to me? I had always treated her well, and we had always been good with sex. We made love several times a week. Well, maybe a little less often lately, but she didn't seem to miss it. I was good in bed and could go on as long as she did. But I always kissed her afterward before we both went to bed. I always did. "Who is he, that asshole? I'm gonna knock him out," I finally shouted. My temper was really starting to boil over. But there was no way in hell I was expecting the kind of response she gave me. It caught me off guard and it took a few moments for it to fully form. "Who said it was a he?" She replied in no more than a whisper, just quietly, just like that. We stared at each other, neither of us sure how to continue. My relief that she wasn't having sex with another guy was balanced by my utter confusion, and what it all meant. One thing I knew for sure was that Mark wasn't going to help right now. Not at all. And all I could do was ask her what it all meant. What was going on? "I'll tell you later when your tea is cold and the papers are on the floor," she replied, not paying attention, and added, "Then I'll take that previous okay as a yes, if you have nothing else to say. Oh, and don't forget we're going to the pub tonight. Should be quite lively." And with those words she smiled, turned, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me with my mouth hanging open. After that, the Arsenal team didn't seem so important anymore. Linda walked into the kitchen, put her things in her hands, and let out a huge sigh of relief. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she had no idea how hard it really was. She was just thankful that the first part was behind her, and hoped that things would go on from here. Linda took 5 long breaths to calm herself down, to brace herself, to reinforce the false calmness she was displaying in front of Terry. She had the rest of the day to get through, and she wasn't going to bring it up again. Then she heard the front door slam and relaxed, feeling the tension leave her as she heard his footsteps approaching down the driveway. This was to be expected. She and Jane had guessed that he would be leaving. He'd go to the pub and would likely return a few hours later in somewhat worse shape. Certainly not drunk. Terry never got drunk. In fact, he never did anything out of the ordinary. That, of course, was the problem. He just didn't change. He was probably the most reckless man on the street. Maybe in the whole town. She still loved him, but not like she had in the early days of their acquaintance. When she'd sat miserable, empty-hearted, and angry at her parents, waiting for him to come and get her. Love matures and grows with the relationship as you grow older with each other. She wanted the sexual side of their life together to develop in the same way. It had been good at first. Very good even, certainly better than the other 2 guys who had ineptly practiced on her teenage body before Terry, which she'd never told him about and couldn't tell him about. It was all about expectations, and her friends seemed to understand that. If you've only ridden a bike, as her friend Mary joked a few weeks ago, then a motorcycle seems fantastic. But that doesn't mean you won't eventually want to ride a car. Another friend joined in demanding a sports car, and they all burst into laughter when Laura dreamily named a Jaguar, a big black car. Linda joined in the fun, but then thought that all she wanted to do was get off the bike. If only Terry would become a car. Any car. No, Terry's love ambitions hadn't grown with their marriage. It had been bang, 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 thanks Mom when they first met, and it still was. She'd made subtle suggestions, then less subtle ones, but all to no avail. One night she even brought home a sex video, which surprised but pleased Terry to give him a chance to see what was really going on between the sheets of other couples. But just when she was getting turned on by a guy stroking a girl's body, he hit the rewind button and went to the hardest part. She could have happily killed him. It was about then that the sex started to dry up. Once a week or more often, then once a week or less often, then once a month, once every few months, and then when was the last time? Terry didn't seem to notice, nor did she seem to care. That was until Jane stopped working and started joining her small circle of friends. Their conversations were often a bit naughty. At the time they thought they were just talking, but Jane took it a step further. She used to work for a PR agency, so she was a little more advanced than the others. She was picking up on topics and ideas that they used to keep to themselves if they even knew what she was talking about. Burying her shame and pulling herself together, she invited Jane over the following week and outlined her problems to her, bursting into tears of frustration and embarrassment. Jane pulled her to her, hugged her to comfort her, and promised to help her in any way she could. That's how it all started. That's how, after only a week or so, she found herself asking Terry if he would mind if she made love to her new friend Jane. The pub was really awful. The beer tasted awful. Even worse than usual. All my mates were so cheerful, and no one could understand what I was going through. Even Mark, who I thought might be more receptive, didn't want to hear about my problems. Of course I couldn't tell them what my problem was. I didn't even give them a clue in case they guessed. But you'd think they'd understand at least a little. No. All they wanted to talk about was soccer. Always soccer. Couldn't they realize there were more important things in this world? I was only there for 2 or 3 hours. I didn't want to drink more than 5 pints. Anyway, none of them agreed with my idea of changing the Arsenal lineup to 5-3-2. I was sure Spurs couldn't handle it, but no one could understand it. It's just that no one could understand it. They're all assholes. I didn't feel like going home at all, so I snuck inside, hoping she wouldn't notice anything. She noticed, of course. She never misses anything. But she didn't say anything to me, which was a blessing, at least. Then ITV showed the match, and it kept me up until late afternoon. By 8:30, she hadn't made a move to change, and it was obvious that tonight's trip to the pub was off. Oh dear, that meant having to sit in silence or the subject was bound to come up. And so it did at dinner. Our conversation started when I casually asked her what she had next week, quite innocently. Making love, I hope. Having sex with Jane, she said, as if she was planning a shopping trip. I was really getting into it. She continued eating as if nothing had changed. At that moment, I realized I had to act like a man, take the initiative and figure it out, put an end to all this garbage once and for all. Why are you doing this to me? I demanded very firmly, trying to show her that this nonsense was beyond me. It seemed to work, at least a little. You really don't know, do you, you dummy? Linda replied, seemingly unsure of herself. I didn't know, of course, but it didn't matter. I just wanted things to go back to normal, like it was until this morning. Then things went downhill from there. It's all about sex. She yelled at me. You don't know how to do anything. Well, that was too much. She'd never complained before. Now we did it no more than once a week or so. But then again, we never did. What should I say next? Now it was my turn. I've been telling you for months now, making love with you is boring. It's always the same. You know less about a woman's body than a chair, she shouted. I looked at the chair. It was strange that she had said that. I wonder what kind of chair she meant, but I was beginning to realize what she was talking about. She was talking about foreplay again, and that was bad news. Yes, I do, I replied. Knowing roughly which direction this was going in, Linda was a little upset, a little agitated, and a little confused about what she was saying. So maybe I didn't get her right. And I thought there must be more to it. Either way, it was useful information. Completely unaware that at least part of her plan had actually come to fruition. By morning, things had settled down. During the night, Terry tried on her a little, wondering if he should try to make love. Had she known his intentions, Linda might have let him continue. But instead, she brushed his hand away and said goodnight reproachfully. Terry, for his part, was relieved. Several days passed without incident. A sort of silent truce was declared. Eventually, Terry stopped holding back, for there was a question he simply had to ask. He had to find out something. No, it wasn't the exact location of her pleasure point, as he had already found it on the internet and now mentally visualized its exact location. It was something else. How did two women actually make love? He finally asked in no more than a whisper, half hoping she wouldn't hear and ignore him. The night before, after Linda had gone to bed, he had enjoyed watching a mild adult movie on TV, marveling at what two girls could get up to, and half wondering why he had never been into it before. But his Linda? Of course Linda wasn't going to do that sort of thing. Wouldn't let that Jane touch her on. Well over her body anyway. Not his Linda. Don't know yet, haven't started yet, Linda retorted, almost unhelpfully, but inadvertently or otherwise whetting his appetite. Nothing, he demanded. Nothing at all. How do you know you'll like it? How do you know you'll like each other? He still hoped she would change her mind, but he was no longer as sure as he had been a day or two ago. He was a little confused, but he was also becoming more and more intrigued. Well, Linda ventured, hesitating before continuing. We've had a little practice. Just a little. Not that much at all. Terry looked at his wife, experiencing strange feelings he'd never felt before. When? He only managed to mumble it out, as he really wanted to ask what exactly they were doing. Not the less interesting when, and also to find out what quite a bit really meant. Linda looked at her husband and decided he was ready. Ready for phase 2. Ready to find out a little more about what was really going on. Frankly, I was surprised at how calm she was. A lot more than I was, that's for sure. I was still high after learning about pleasure points and how biologically they are only meant for one. When I went back online to see if I had gotten it right, and wasn't mistaken, I clicked on the link and now I was an expert on the female body. I never thought Fanny Hill was invented based on this. This video got me thinking. It made me wonder what this Jane looked like. I was really hoping she was pretty, although I don't know why. Anyway, Linda started telling me about how they were practicing. I guess they hadn't planned for it to happen this way, although they had already decided a few days before that they liked each other. Linda was upset about something, but I forgot to ask what it was. Then she started to cry, and Jane began to comfort her. One thing led to another, it seems, and soon they decided to kiss properly on the lips like with a boyfriend. I thought they were going to make it work, that they would start kissing and then tongues and all that. But I guess not. They sat across from each other and looked into each other's eyes for a while. She said they were picking up the mood, and then slowly, very slowly, they put their lips to each other, just lightly touching, licking each other's lips. I could tell she liked it by the look on her face as she experienced it. It really turned me on too. I don't know why we'd never done this before. Of course, then they kissed properly. Well, Linda and I had been doing it for years. Or maybe it was years ago when we were doing it. Because now we were getting too used to each other. It started to seem like it wasn't necessary. Or something like that, I guess. When Linda told me about the first time another girl touched her breasts, my imagination ran wild. She has nice breasts. You probably think I like huge breasts. But you're wrong. I have nothing against them being big, but I prefer them to be medium. Not too big and not too small. Mine are Linda's actually, so this Jane Bird can count herself lucky. She didn't embarrass herself by telling me how her friend slipped her hand inside her top. And she must have enjoyed it so much because she described every movement in such detail as Jane unbuttoned her blouse, pulled down her bra, and fondled both breasts, stroking them. She must have really enjoyed it because by the time she was done, she had already unbuttoned her blouse and reached down to touch her breasts. Like this, right in front of my eyes. I felt like she might have thought a little more about my situation, but I decided to accept it and not complain. I'd never gotten her to that state myself, but if I tried hard enough, I could. It's not hard. You just have to know what a girl likes. Not too much at one time on any one area. Like moving and not overdoing it. You can use your hands or lips, but better both, like Linda said Jane did with her. She went on and it was very interesting, although I wasn't thrilled with what she did to Jane. That's very rude, I thought, and almost told her so. She probably saw that I wasn't happy and went on to tell me what happened next. If it was just practice, God knows what these girls get up to when they get serious. If having her breast touched wasn't enough, this Jane Bird started putting her hand under her wife's skirt. Apparently she put up with it for a long time, and Linda seemed to be persistent in trying to tell me about it. I would have gotten it over with a lot quicker myself. Although, come to think of it, most of them I've never even tried. So maybe you need a little more time, I wonder. I wondered, I'll tell you. And then I messed it up just as I was enjoying it. How did she get it off? I asked when she told me that Jane had pulled down her skirt. I let the cat out of the bag a little that I was interested, but Linda didn't look too concerned. That's it, she said, and started to wriggle out of her skirt. No, exclaimed I. Then, I'm sorry, Linda. I don't think it's nice, but I got a shock. She pulled her skirt down, straight down, and then tossed it aside. It wasn't that, or even that she wasn't wearing panties, although that was a big enough surprise. I double-checked to make sure. But it was true, and I wasn't wrong the first time. Next, we made love with my wife, and I explored her whole body, and she loved it. She looked quite pleased, but when a guy knows what he's doing, has confidence in a woman's body, it's not hard at all. Also, it turned out that the story about her and this Jane was made up. She made it up all by herself. This Jane Bird was just one of her friends, and they made up the whole sex thing between them just for laughs. I have no idea why. She was just fooling around and trying to fool me, but as it turned out, it worked out just fine. Between you and me, I think all that talk about imaginary sex with another woman probably relaxed her a bit and made her think more about things. I can say that she has changed for the better and has become much more adventurous in bed than she used to be. Oh yeah, The sex has gotten a lot better since then. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if the story about her and Jane was true. So it really worked out, Jane says. He fell in love, really believed you, and it was all worth the risk. A few days passed and Linda stopped by to tell her friend how well their plan had worked. It did, Linda replied. He was hooked. Everything was great, and it's been that way ever since. I never realized he could be so adventurous. He is always looking for something on the internet and insists we try it every night. I couldn't have done it without your help. If I pretended to play with another man, he'd just freak out. But with another woman, it just blew his mind. Maybe he'll write a book about it. Jane laughed, and they both giggled, pleased that their ruse with Terry had succeeded. Jane looked at Linda, pleased that their little intrigue had succeeded, and that her marriage was now back in good shape. But there was still one last question she had to ask. Is he better than me? No, silly. Really very good. But different, that's all. Linda laughed in response and lay naked on Jane's bed, arching her back to stretch her breasts. When she first sought Jane's help, Linda never imagined she would end up getting the best of both worlds. And Terry was just as pleased, and started lecturing his buddies at the pub during Sunday lunches. The wives of all his friends benefited greatly from their husbands' new knowledge. Rumor has it that Linda introduced Terry to Jane, and all three became very good friends. It's only a rumor, of course, but who knows? The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.